Falling, Slushy, Instrument.
Hello. How are all of you all? I can't hear you because you're all on mute. You don't all have to be on mute.
Doing well.
Great.
Very good. Very, very good.
Hello, everyone. I think we are expecting a few more people, but let's go ahead and get started. Hi, I'm Jennifer Ambrosino. I am the Senior Staffing Manager for the Economic Studies program, and I work on recruiting and employee engagement here in the Economic Studies program. So this event was organized in partnership with the Baton Career Services Office, the Economics Career Office, and the UVA Career Center. I'm going to share some links in the chat. Please feel free to ask questions there during the presentation, and then there will be plenty of time for questions once Kristen's done her part. We've got a few other Brookings people on the call today, and I think what we'll do is we'll start with Kristen's presentation, and then after she finishes, I'll have the rest of my team introduce themselves, and we'll spend the rest of the time answering your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kristen Brody. Hi, Kristen. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. How are all of you? So I am supposed to talk to you today about what it would be like to work at a think tank. So I am going to kind of give you a bit about my education and background. Then I will talk to you about the work that we do. And then I will answer any questions that you have. I'm going to talk a bit about my research. I have a couple of different PowerPoint decks and slides that I can send to you based on your interest. I didn't want to take the time today to go over a long presentation. I was hoping that we could have more of an interactive conversation. So I started off as a criminal justice major at Alcorn State University. And I thought that I wanted to go to law school. So I was sure of that when I was most of your ages. I was absolutely sure, and you could not have convinced me of anything different. However, I went on to earn an MBA and then to earn a PhD in economics, to become a professor, and to work at a couple of different think tanks. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of different positions that you might be interested in. One would be research assistant, and the other one would be research analyst. So at the Brookings Institution, there are a number of centers and projects. I work for the Hamilton Project. We do a lot of macroeconomic work. We focus on social policy, social safety nets, information around unemployment, looking at how the pandemic is affecting the economy and workers. And so for the Hamilton Project, we currently have 3 research assistants, and we are in the process of hiring a research analyst. So you might ask, what do they do, right? So the research assistants have quite a bit of input with us, and they play a very important role. So they come to our meetings with senior staff. They interact with authors that we commission papers from. They send a lot of communications. And something that might be exciting to you is they also do get to co-author papers. So some of the things that you may have heard about, like the CARES Act or various fiscal impulse things, when you hear about people receiving stimulus money or wanting to receive more stimulus money, we work on some of those things. It may not necessarily have the Brookings name or the Hamilton Project name, but some of those things do start with us. And so our research assistants play a role in that. So if you were to be a research assistant, if that's something that you're interested in, you may get to co-author papers that could turn into policy that affect the lives of everyday Americans. So that I think is pretty cool. Something else that you might find interesting, we do a lot of media. I just finished talking to someone from the Boston Globe about a housing paper that we wrote. I've talked to people from the Wall Street Journal, which you may have heard of, New York Times, right? So that's pretty cool when something that you write is quoted on CNBC, or when the Wall Street Journal is calling to talk to you because your name is out there. It can also be really cool for your social media presence, right? If you're on Twitter or LinkedIn, having people contact you or wanting you to come for jobs because of your research. So thinking about coming out of undergrad or grad school with published research, I think is a pretty cool goal. So I'm a college professor by trade. I am the policy director at Brookings now, but I don't want to talk forever. I want to stop just a bit and ask you, do you have specific questions about RA positions or analyst positions that I can ask, and maybe we can kind of have a conversation in that regard. I see that Maureen Coffey raised her hand.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the difference is between the RAs and the analysts, or are they kind of the same track? Like what is the differentiation?
That's an excellent question. So generally the research assistants the research assistants would have a bachelor's degree. They may have had some experience, maybe they had an internship, or they served as an RA at a similar sort of organization, where generally the analyst for the Hamilton project would have a master's degree or at least 2 years of experience in addition to what the research assistants would have.
Yeah, that's generally true in economic studies, not just the Hamilton project. And an analyst has they have to have at least 2 years of experience and a master's degree. Whereas the research assistants, we usually hire them right after they get their undergraduate with no job experience required for the position. Before we move on, I just would like all the Brookings people on the call to introduce themselves. I can't see you because there's a lot of people on this call, but I know who should be here. I see Stephanie Sensula, so I'll start with her. If you could just tell that Stephanie's here because she's the only UVA alum on staff at the moment. And she is going to introduce herself to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. As Jen said, I'm Stephanie Sensula. I'm a UVA alum, and I would love there to be more of us in ES. So please take a look at our job and internship postings and apply. I am the Assistant Director of the Hutchins Center on Fiscal and Monetary Policy, which is one of the centers within ES. Excuse me. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the way the program is structured, but there are a number of different centers and initiatives within economic studies that focus on different policy areas. And so I was not an econ major. I took a couple kind of entry-level classes, but I was a government and Spanish major. And so my work consists more of the comms, development, which is like fundraising, working with the research assistants and scholars, but not actually, doing the research, doing the work to support and promote and disseminate the research that's done.
Thanks, Stephanie. I saw Tim Higashi is here. Tim?
Yes, thanks, Jen. Yeah, good to see you all. I'm Tim Higashi. I am a senior research analyst. I have been at Brookings for this is almost 3 years now, just about 3 years. I really enjoyed my time here. I have a graduate degree. I have a master's in public administration, and my focus there was in public finance. So it's a little bit of a different perspective. And I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but kind of building off of what Kristen said, I get the opportunity, using the example of the stimulus bills, working with congressional staff on those bills. And common question we got was, are we going to get another stimulus check? And we don't know the answer to that yet, but it's been a really good experience here. And I really encourage you, if you're interested in, policy, and as Kristen said, having an impact, it's a great place to work. And I think also working with our colleagues here, from whom you'll hear different perspectives is another big plus.
Okay, I know I saw Elizabeth Jacobson.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I am Senior Development Coordinator in Economic Studies. I've been at Brookings just over 3 years now. And like Stephanie, I did not major in economics. As part of the fundraising team, I make sure that we have we raise all the money necessary so that Kristen and all of our scholars and centers have the funds they need to put out all the great work they do.
I think Khadijah is here, but I haven't seen her.
Yes.
Khadijah? Yes. Hi.
Hi, everyone. My name's Khadijah Yilla. I currently work in the Hutchins Center for Fiscal and Monetary Policy with Stephanie. I am a senior research assistant, and I've been at Brookings now for about 1.5 years, I would say. I graduated 2 years ago in 2018 from Pomona College, a small liberal arts college in California, where I double majored in math and economics. And after college, I did a year at Goldman Sachs, but then transitioned to Brookings after considering the path towards like a PhD in economics. So I'm happy to talk about the application process, what RAs do specifically to support the different economists and scholars, and anything else in that regard.
And then I think there's one more person, but she's not joining us until later. Is Melanie here? Oh, no, she is here. Hey, Melanie.
Hi, my name is Melanie Glarski. I work with Kristen with the Hamilton Project. I manage our events and our strategic outreach. So our events are both public and private. So all of the public forums that we put on, which are now all virtual, and then any sort of private roundtable luncheon discussion in a world where we were all together. And then on the strategic outreach side for us, it is how do we get the work that Kristen and our scholars are working on into the hands of people who then can take it and implement it and put it into practice. So it's how do we think holistically about where the work goes. And then I'm also on our comms team for Hamilton Project. So thinking about the strategic side of which reporters to reach out to, how do we make sure the work is getting out to the media so they need it. Yeah. There.
All right, that's all the Brookings folks on the call. As far as did I miss anyone? No. Okay.
Is Chris joining?
No.
Okay.
No. So we want to hear from you.
Sure. So just a question for clarification. So if you have, or I guess will have hopefully in May, a master's degree, but do not have 2 years of relevant work experience, then you would still apply for the research assistant position and not the research analyst position?
That's a great question. Yes, you would probably, well, you could apply for either one of them. I would say you're probably more likely to be more qualified for a research assistant position if you don't have any work experience. Different centers, there are a bunch of research analysts. I think there's a couple of research analyst positions open right now, and different people have different requirements. But for the most part, a research analyst is a much more seasoned person who has actual real life work experience.
And I would just add sometimes if someone comes in with a master's or with like 1 year of experience, for example, they can be hired as a senior research assistant. So there is a little bit of gray area in between. So it wouldn't be advertised as a senior research assistant, but it would just be commensurate with experience or degree.
I think another thing to think about, depending on which center or project it is your statistics background and what software you're familiar with. Some of them want someone who is familiar with R or Stata at different levels, right? So that's not all centers and projects, but some of them do look for that.
Sorry, I was muted. Catherine Johnson, I see you have your hand up.
Oh, yeah. I was just wondering if you could speak to a little bit what the day-to-day is like as a research assistant.
Khadijah, you want to take that one?
Yes. So the day-to-day isn't really consistent, I would say. And this is specific to the work we do at Hutchins, but from conversations I have with the other RAs across centers, I would say this is true. So as a research assistant, I have like a couple of different projects that are maybe ongoing with the different economists I work with in Hutchins. So in a typical day, I might be doing like some analysis in Stata or R to have like an output that one of the economists needs. So for example, a scholar I was working with recently, Nellie Lang, has been working on finishing some graphs and tables for a paper she's working on publishing. So she just had me do some regressions in Stata and send her the output that was yesterday. But then a day like today, for example, I'm doing a lot more literature reviews for a blog post I'm writing with some other RAs in the center. So it really varies. It's a combination of qualitative work, so like the literature reviews, seeing what's happening with the relevant topics in terms of like policy, what is Congress doing, joined with like the quantitative aspect, so running regressions and data, doing like a graphical output from R, different things like that. But for us in Hutchins, we work closely with like Stephanie to assign projects, so it really depends again on the research cycle what the day looks like, if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Victoria Nelson.
Thank you so much. I guess my question is specifically for staff members of color at the Brookings Institution. I was just wondering what your honest experiences have been like in your organization, because I know that that's something that's really important for me when I'm looking for a good workplace environment.
I think I'll take that one. Brookings has been very welcoming, and it's a comparison, right? So I was a supply chain analyst many years ago, many years ago at a very large healthcare company, Catholic healthcare company, and they said that they were open and welcoming, but they weren't. There were a lot of microaggressions, and I personally have not found that at Brookings. I think that there is still room for diversity, but there are a lot of discussions. We have scholar lunches and there are various seminars. Some of them are larger than others. Sometimes for the lunches, there may only be 5, to 10 people. And so we have conversations about race around current events. And I think it's the sort of place where if people have questions about other races or cultures, they will ask and they're open to the answers. They may say, wow, I didn't know that the situation was like that, or I didn't realize that that was your experience. I'm really sorry that you experienced that. So I think it's a place of really good dialogue and people working to understand each other.
Yeah, and if I could add to Kristen's point, because it's like an academic institution where we're constantly trying to learn from our colleagues, I felt like I've always been welcome to share my experiences, or if I notice something in a publication, I'm just like, that's not exactly correct. Like I remembered last year we were publishing something and I was doing like a final edit and I noticed like we were not capitalizing the being Black, and I felt strongly about that. So I mentioned it to one of the scholars, and he was like very open into hearing about that perspective. And then the next week, actually, the institution published like their writing guide, and they made a note to say like the being Black should be capitalized always. So I always felt like they're constantly learning and trying to figure out where do we need to push the needle, and especially as Brookings, like a forefront in the public policy conversation, where do we need to take a position and publicize that to kind of keep the conversation going. So it's been fairly welcoming. There are still areas of improvement, but it's better than my other experience before coming here.
Thank you.
All right. Emily Barksdale.
Hi, thanks. So my original question was pretty similar to Catherine's about just kind of like a day in the life, but building off of that, it does sound like most, or at least a lot of the work that y'all do is collaborative. And I would love your input on what you think some necessary qualities or kind of what qualities make someone at Brookings successful in terms of maybe things that you've seen before or things that you definitely look for in an applicant.
I think I can take that. And after that, I saw Duncan had his hand raised, like his actual hand raised. I think that one of the things is that we are working remotely now. I think that it will be easier once we return to face-to-face work. So I think time management is big, just having your calendar set up and any sort of notifications or calendar, alarms or things like that, because otherwise you're at home, right? Or, wherever you are. It's not the sort of thing where somebody can pop into your office and say, reminders or whatever. So you've got to have that set up. we do a lot of things collaboratively where one person will write it, maybe co-authoring with someone else, and then someone else edits, and then someone else edits, right? So there's a lot of work like that. And so I think that you have to be willing to take feedback and not take it personally if you're asked to edit something or rewrite something, I'm sorry. Basically because the work that we put out is top quality, right? And so it needs to be accurate and it needs to be correct. And we definitely want to get feedback before it's published. So time management, ability to take feedback, and also I think the willingness to ask for help or ask questions rather than just, kind of thinking that you know what's going on and taking up time, going in the wrong direction when people really are there to help and assist and make sure that everyone is on the right track.
Yeah, maybe I'll follow Kristen on that too. I based on Ben's question, I realized I didn't do a good job explaining more of my background. Not only do I have a grad degree, but I worked in the federal government and also at OECD in their Belgium office for a year. And one thing I think Kristen mentioned about the collaboration, and I love that element of Brookings and being able to, really glean from someone else's expertise and produce something really, high quality. I also would add that something that would make someone a successful candidate at Brookings is also someone that takes a lot of initiative. I think there's a lot of projects and there's a lot of things on which we can be working. I mean, there's just, especially now with, the pandemic and its economic implications, there's the field and the area to write in is just voluminous. So there's so much one can do. And so I think being able to take initiative and, draft something up or write something up or do like as Khadija just articulated, do a lit review, figure out what's going on the congressional side, see how an area that you wanted to work in or wanted to research in, how would you frame that? How would you set that in the context of what's happening? And so I've seen in my experience in my own role and also with the other staff with whom I've worked, those that take initiative really, they do well. They do well.
So Duncan, did you still have a question?
Yes, ma'am. So we've touched upon this a little bit, but I was just wondering what typically makes a competitive applicant for some of these entry-level positions for those who've just graduated college?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is very competitive at Brookings. We typically have about 350 to 400 people apply for about 4 or 5 open positions. So, unfortunately, oftentimes, like some of it is like just very, very minute details that are going to make a difference between whether your application gets seen, whether it doesn't. Did you call us the Brookings Institution in your cover letter, which is our actual name, and not the Brookings Institute? Did you spell everything correctly? Have you expressed real interest in the research areas that we are doing research in? Have you demonstrated your skills in that? Grades are really important. What courses you've taken are really important. We want to see that you've taken a mix of economics, you've taken econometrics, that you've really, got the skills that we need. Anyone else want to chime in? Khadija?
I can jump in.
Sorry to keep picking on you, but you're
I can jump in. I don't know if Khadija wanted to go, but
oh yeah, Stephanie too.
No, absolutely, Stephanie.
Okay. So obviously, like I said, I myself was not an econ major. I'm not in a research role, but I do a lot of the hiring and supervision of our research assistants. And I'd say 2 things that are important, at least in the Hutchins Center, and I would wager elsewhere in the program, are that you have some proven experience and comfort with a programming software. We don't look for like MATLAB or like, it's not like you have to have one or all of them, but we do pretty much require experience with one of them. And the other, which is like almost the opposite of that, is good writing, which isn't always emphasized in the econ major, but ends up being a really big and important part of the research assistant job when you're, you know, maybe co-authoring a blog post or doing a lit review. It's not just knowing the material, but being able to explain or transmit the information to the appropriate audience, whether that's like the senior scholar that you're working with, or in the case of a blog post, like the broader public or reporters. So writing well for a variety of audiences is important too. And that's not, I think, necessarily something that people automatically think of with econ RA jobs. So I would just emphasize that.
Also, if you look in the chat, that first link that I posted there, that has a lot of information about being an RA at Brookings and frequently asked questions and details. So I definitely recommend you look at that.
Yeah. And to add to Stephanie's point, I think even if you don't necessarily have like all the research experience in the world, like emphasizing your passions and why you want to do the work. And if you do also have research experience, knowing the story behind why, because a lot of people know how to run through like the code and why they added it in, or like the econometrics, but not necessarily understanding the story behind research and like what motivates you and everything. So like when I came in from Goldman, so finance, so I didn't have like a lot of research, but I was like, oh, I'm passionate about economics because of blah, 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 and all these other things. So like that, I was able to clarify and emphasize my passion and the why behind my story, even if I didn't have like the technicals on point.
Yeah, that actually is something Khadija said, just reminded me one phrase that I'd never heard before getting to this job in ES, but that I now hear all the time is intellectual curiosity, which basically is everything Khadija was just describing, not just being able to do X, Y, Z, but understanding why you're doing that and wanting to do it because you're interested in the story that is being told.
Todd Hall, see your hands up?
Yes. Well, first I want to just thank you for the presentation so far and the Q&A. This has been very informative. I'm curious a little bit from the PhD side. So I'm currently in the dual master's in public policy, PhD in education policy here. And prior to that, I spent some time working at JPAL, which is a poverty action lab, kind of similar in the think tank, not quite a think tank, but similar kind of at the intersection of research and policy. And I have a question, I guess, more for Kristen. I was wondering if you could speak to a little how you weighed kind of continuing in academia versus being in the think tank space and how much fluidity you are finding between those two.
Sure. So it wasn't a hard decision at all. Brookings is the #1 think tank in the nation right now. I didn't get that from US News and World Reports. Something somewhere may rank somebody else higher, but for me, for all of my colleagues, when I would watch the news, which I do all the time, CNN, MSNBC, when that person from Brookings came on, that was it, right? Someone from Brookings said, and that just kind of was it for me. I have tenure at Dillard University. So, and this is the second time that I've had tenure. So that meant that I had quite a bit of freedom, right? Like my president, Dr. Kimbrough, begged me not to leave in the beginning, but then it's kind of like, well, you're going to Brookings, right? So we'll have someone that we can claim at Brookings. So I think that kind of made the transition easier, right? And that however long my time at Brookings lasts, hopefully forever, because it is a great organization, I know that the academy will be there, right? So I think that's important. So as an academic, I think it's, some people value tenure, some people value experiences, some people value money, right? So I think that that prioritization helps people determine what opportunities to take.
Thank you.
Alyssa?
Hi, yes. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. I really appreciate it.
And this might actually not be something you might be able to answer, but I thought I'd ask anyway. I know through my experience, I've always loved, to Kristen's point, always loved citing Brookings Institution articles and everything, and all my studies kind of got me to that and actually kind of inspired me a little bit. So I've always been interested in the government studies area, and I was curious if you would say that some of the information you gave us regarding research assistants and analysts, are those positions, the requirements more or less carry over? Is it a completely different thing?
We don't, I don't actually know what their requirements are, but those are specific to economic studies. I don't think governance studies is a much smaller program than ES. We have about 100 people in ES, and I think GS has maybe half that. So they don't have, we hire on a cohort. So we hire every year. We're hiring for a 2-year term for our research assistants. So we're constantly hiring. GS, I don't know when they probably do more on like when there's an opening, there's a posting. So I don't know. I don't know.
No problem. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Alexandria?
Can you guys hear me okay? I have to wear my mask in the library. So I'm a first year grad student, and something I've been trying to figure out this past year is understanding on the spectrum of practitioner to researcher, where my passions lie. And so I was just wondering if you guys could elaborate a little bit on what impact the Brookings Institute has in terms of seeing some of the research that you guys do play out in real life. I know it doesn't always happen that way because politics is involved in other sort of institutional like barriers, but I'm just curious if you guys could elaborate a little bit on that.
So I just asked Jennifer this question in the chat. Maybe she'll answer me privately, but I have some slides. Like I could show an example. I don't know if we want to just keep it conversational or if you'd like for me to kind of show an example.
Whatever works the best for the group.
Yeah, like I said, I prepared slides, but I didn't want to take the whole time just with a presentation of research. So Jennifer, what would you?
I think we have time. It's only 1:35. So if you want to take 5-10 minutes to do that, I think that's
okay.
Fine.
I'm
seeing nods. I'm seeing nods, I think. Are people nodding about that? Yeah, all right.
All right. Let me share my screen really quick. And this generally is like an hour-long presentation. So I'm definitely not going to give you the whole presentation. But I will give you just kind of some background about how the process kind of happens. So let me see if I can share this. Nope, I think I have too many windows open. Give me just one very hot second to close one or two things, and then maybe it will let me do it.
Let me take another question, Kristen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Sophie?
Yeah, thank you. So my question is for Melanie, and I was wondering kind of more on the outreach and communications and advocacy kind of side of things. What skills you guys look for both interns and research assistants, and kind of what core competencies are necessary to work for Brookings in that side of things.
Sure. So thinking about kind of what skills we're looking for somebody who is a really strong communicator. So somebody who is able to kind of think about how we're going to take this research, and we are going to distill it down into basic English, basically. So taking these really complex ideas and turning it into something that the layperson can understand. We like to see somebody who's had some internship experience in the past, either working something, even if that means at your university, working in one of the departments, working in communications. we're looking to see how you are as an editor. Find that to be incredibly important, because a lot of what we ask our interns to do, at least from my side, is editing. We're looking for somebody who's incredibly detail oriented and who kind of understands the landscape, has a generic understanding of the policy space and the general issues that we're working in. We're not asking you to know everything, obviously, but just understanding what we're talking about and who can join those conversations. I think that's most of what we're looking for. And then also just is interested and willing and is just overall pretty eager to get involved. I think it's just very key qualities.
All right, looks like Kristen's ready.
Oh, and I will say we do have internships open right now in communications, and that give you a little bit more of a background on the type of experience that we're looking for in that space too.
Yeah, we don't have any research internships open now, but we will in the summer. And those will go up in January.
So, like I said, I'm not going to go over the whole thing. This is just one of the topics that we're working on now. And this paper will come out in February. So I'm going to give you a bit of a preview. The data that I'm going to show people have seen it, but it hasn't been shared. So this paper is going to talk about jobs at high and low risk of being automated. And so I start off with what is automation for people who may think they know or have some ideas. So robotics, 3D printing, machine learning, smart systems, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence. Basically, it's the use of largely automatic equipment in a system of manufacturing or other production process. So for people who say that, I've never used automation. I've not seen a robot. The phone that you have in your hand is automation. The fact that you can use Uber or Lyft, all of that is automation. The self-checkout machine is automation. So it's so hard not to give all the details, but basically automation will raise productivity globally, as it has, but it also will mean that some people will lose jobs or need to transition into different jobs. So one of the statistics that I often hear is that the general retail sector lost 51,000 jobs between 2007 and 2016. But the thing that you hear less about is the fact that e-commerce added 355,000 jobs during that time period. So if people are able and ready and willing and have the training, then there were more than enough jobs to soak up the retail sector jobs, right? But of course, it's not a seamless transition. Just because you worked in retail doesn't mean that you have the training to go into e-commerce. So first, I want to look at jobs at high risk of being automated. And so basically, I'm not gonna go over all of these. I'll just take the top line with cashier. So what this table tells us is that in 2019, there were 3,164,000 cashiers. The automation risk score 0.97 means that in that 8-hour day that a cashier does whatever it is that they do, those skills, the tasks, 97% of that could be done by a computer or other machine. So that's what the automation risk score tells us. And you can see that 3.4% of the female workforce, 1.79% of the white workforce, 2.92 for the Black workforce, 2.26 for Asian, 2.75 for Hispanic, right? And so overall, 36 million people are employed in these high-risk jobs. African Americans are overrepresented in 11 of the jobs. Hispanics are overrepresented in 13. I'm going to skip some because I want to compare that to jobs at low risk of being automated. Completely different skills, completely different types of jobs. The first one, elementary and middle school teachers with an automation risk score of 0.0044. So very, very little of that job could be done by a computer. You have to have a person. Overall, these jobs employ 22 million Americans, and African Americans are only overrepresented in 5 of them. Hispanics are not overrepresented in any of these jobs. So as we think about this, I list some strategic solutions. So thinking about increasing connections between educators and employers to create pipelines from school to employment for jobs that will actually exist. And helping schools and students to understand that you may be majoring in something that will soon be obsolete or will be done by a computer. So trying to help schools to prepare students with skills for jobs that will be available. And I focus specifically on HBCUs and MSIs because African Americans and Latinos are overrepresented in these particular jobs. This slide just gives some examples of centers and projects at schools like Dillard, Alabama A&M, Kentucky State, and Atlanta Metropolitan. So if schools are interested in these sorts of programs, I can share that information with them. So like I said, that's kind of the short version, but that is one example of the kind of research that I'm working on and maybe similar to others at Brookings. I want to stop sharing. There we go.
So jump in a little bit on the impact question as well. I've been doing a ton of work on kind of pulling together what we've done in the last year, and some examples of how our work is being actively impacted is that there was a letter that the head of the USPTO, which is a trade organization, patent and trade organization, wrote that directly cited our work. We've seen our work show up in legislation, and it's showing up in letters that are written by the Joint Economic Committee in the Senate. So we're seeing the work really showing up. And that's the amazing thing about this organization. It has such a wide reach that you don't know where you're going to find it. And a lot of that we directly do ourselves. We'll reach out, we'll make those connections, but at other times they just will see our research and they'll reach out back to us, and then we can work with whoever, the lawmaker, or if it's somebody who's from a different organization that wants to take our work and then they want to take it. It's really important to understand that we don't lobby, we can just share our work, and then other people can take it, and what they do with it is up to them. So we are here as a service to provide all this amazing research, and then it goes out into the world, and we want to see the impact that it's going to provide.
Let me follow up on Melanie's there, because I have an example within the last year. When we were all together, I went to Melanie's office, and I think Hamilton had published a book, and Melanie will know the name of it more than I would, but I think it was like Fiscal Recession Ready. That's what
Recession Ready. Yep.
And so I was in a meeting in the Senate Budget Committee, and one of the staff members had asked me if we knew of this group called the Hamilton Project. I was like, I think I know where they are. They're about one floor up from me. And so we were able to get, they were curious about fiscal stabilizers and how anyway, let's not get into the econ of it, but I was able to get, I don't know, Melanie, I took maybe 10 copies of the book or something and was able to deliver it to the Senate Budget Committee. Wanted to fill their library and give it to their senators and the member staff. So there's an example of course, we weren't lobbying or saying that you should do fiscal stabilizer, you should do fiscal stabilizers, but they knew of the work, and that's how, on the research side as a research assistant, you're working on, looking back to the 1970s to see if there were fiscal stabilizers put in place, what impact they've had over the last 30 years. Then Melanie's comms team works on packaging it, puts in a beautiful book, and then some of us are working on different sides of it, and eventually, you can see that Hill's staff end up wanting it and senators need it. And then that can, and actually fiscal stabilizers was an important feature of the legislative discussion over this last 8 months in particular. And then eventually it gets to Elizabeth, who's our development person, and she packages it up really nicely and works on getting additional grants to the work. So it's a real full cycle we have.
Exactly. So we had some pieces that ended up in the CARES Act as an example. So from that fiscal stabilizer book, and we made sure that we hand drop a copy of that book in every House and Senate office and sent it to every state legislature. So everybody was going to have it. And then somebody saw it who then went to a meeting with Tim, and then they're like, wait, how did they get it? I want it. So it's all about how to get it out there so we can have the most impact for the product that on the research side is being created.
Benjamin, you've had your hand up for a while. Is that from before, or did you have a question?
No, I do have a question. So for a lot of us, this will be our first like real job interviews. And I just was curious. I think people often ask like what to do in a job interview, but less I hear what not to do. And so just for those of you who have done a lot of hiring, some of you have mentioned that process. Can you just talk about some of those do's and also particularly the don'ts? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, that's
Stephanie,
a really
you
good.
wanna take that?
Yeah. It's a really good question, and I think even just thinking like that will help you a lot. Because I think most people go in interviews having prepared like their resume and reading up on the organization, but thinking about how to kind of go beyond that, I think is a useful exercise. So even just by thinking like this, you're already probably a step ahead. I'll go back to what Khadijah talked about earlier as demonstrating like real enthusiasm and passion and kind of deeper understanding or desire to understand what's going on behind the scenes, not just like, I can use R, I've done X years of research assistance for professor. But for example, in our interviews, we often like to ask candidates about a research project they've done in school, independently for work, et cetera, to talk about it. And one thing that can kind of be a pitfall is just kind of like listing the tasks you did. You know, my boss asked me to do this. I created this data visualization, et cetera. So while that's still important, that's probably all already captured on your resume or in your cover letter. And I think the value add of that conversation in an interview is that you can talk about like what drew you to the project, what challenges you uncovered, and how you propose ways to work around them, what you hope the policy impact of the research will be. And I think sometimes people hold themselves back from that a little, thinking, you know, I'm a research assistant, it's not my place to talk about or wonder about those types of things. But particularly if you're looking for a career in economics, you will get to that place where it is your place or your job to be doing those types of things. And so kind of already practicing and having like the mental framing of that approach to research, and not just like XYZ tasks to help someone else add up to the bigger picture. And so being able to talk about and think about research in that way is like a huge value add, I think.
Yeah, and that makes sense, I guess, because in particular, I'm assuming that most, if not all of the folks that apply to the positions that you review applicants for, like know how to do a majority of the things that
right.
you would need them to do. And so then it's like, what's the differentiator?
Exactly. Like Jen said, we get, you know, hundreds of applicants, probably, you know, the vast majority of whom are qualified. So it's the like above and beyond that, which is really hard to qualify to describe right now, but hopefully that like mental framing exercise is at least moderately helpful.
No, it's actually very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
I might add,
Sorry.
I was just going to add one quick thing, something that I found. If there are particular people whose work you're interested in or that you've read, maybe mentioning that, right? And saying that you may want to work with them on similar projects. I think having specific interests, so not just Brookings and not just Hutchins or Hamilton, but, you know, I'm Melanie Galarski, I'm really interested in your research on fiscal impulse, or, you know, something specific like that, you know, could make a difference.
Yeah, we have screening questions where we ask people to rank their interest in the various policy areas that we are hiring for. And I think a lot of times people are afraid to say that that's going to like knock them out of consideration for something else if they, so they're like, I like everything, you know, that's not a good idea. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Miles.
Hi, thanks first for hosting this. I'm really curious about when I was hearing Tim talk about you know, like your work kind of being positive more than normative, like just giving the data or the research instead of, and Melanie not lobbying. I was wondering how you decide then, like what it is that you should research. You know, if you don't have that I've heard you talk a lot about the why. Like, so how do you capture the why without like making it too apparent or it leading to a direct result in the end?
Yeah, good question. Well, I don't want to get into the lobbying side without any of our lawyers on the call, so we don't end up tripping up. But, Miles, in general, I'd say that, we look, a lot of the landscape will dictate what we work on to an extent. I mean, I would say one value of Brookings relative to other think tanks and even indeed other organizations with whom I've worked is that we have the reputation and generally a pretty stable funding source. Therefore, we're not beholden to what's happening at that exact moment, and we can look out in the future, like Kristen, for instance, is doing with automation. That's an example of something that, not all bookkeepers and accountants have lost their job this year, but in the future, that will be something that will come up. And that's an example of an area where we could say, here are some policy options that could help mitigate or work to help these displaced workers, or here's some job skills or reskilling programs that could be implemented that have worked, say, in another country or another state. And we lay out some of the options for that. And that way, we are not saying, Senator X or Representative X or Chairman or Chairwoman X, you should do this or you should do that. Instead, we say, here are the 10 options that have worked, here's what hasn't worked, and build the right package for what the legislative process would allow. I don't know if Kristen would elaborate on that.
Okay, come off of mute, yes. So how do we decide what to work on? So I think for the Hamilton project, we have a meeting twice a year, I think. I've been there since August. So we have this meeting where everyone gets to say what they'd like to work on within, the sort of macroeconomic policy scope. And so everybody is on the call and people can put in their pitch, research and analysts, RAs, and the scholars. So everybody gets to have some input. It's not just top down. So each of our RAs, they have different topics that they'd like to work on. They each in their second year will write an economic analysis on their own. And so we consider the topics. If two people have similar topics, they may decide to work on them together. And then we also commission papers from authors. But for us, everybody does get to have some input into the topics that we work on.
I wouldn't say that's necessarily true across the board in our research projects because a lot of times it's just focused on what the scholars' priorities are. But
and one other thing I just note for that is there's typically a mission behind every project or center that's under ES. So the project or center you work for, that's going to be the type of work that the center is going to be driven by. So for example, Hutchins is fiscal monetary policy. Their work is all going to fall under that umbrella. We have a health policy center, they'll fall under that. So that really, and then the nitty gritty of what type of research then will be a bit more up to the scholars and staff.
Yeah, that was kind of the point I was going to add as well. Like with Hutchins, part of our mission is providing like explainers or being that middle ground between like policy experts and like economists. So some of the work that we do are a lot of like explainers on what is the Federal Reserve doing. Like you hear about repos a lot, but what exactly is repos? So we do so that type of work doesn't necessarily take a next position because we're more so just explaining the landscape and more of like the technical things behind. And then like someone else mentioned, what happens afterwards is beyond us, but we just want to explain what's going on because we're able to serve as like that middle ground between economists and policy experts. So it does range by the mission aspect a lot, I would agree.
Yeah, and so building on what Khadija just said and what Melanie said earlier is we are actually strictly nonpartisan. A lot of places, including like the New York Times or what have you, will say that, you know, we are center left or left leaning or what have you, but like we are actually nonpartisan. We do not take any positions on any sort of legislation. And if we were actually to lobby, we would lose our 501c3 status as a nonprofit. So this is all things that we take very seriously as an institution, especially because our independence is what sets us apart from some other think tanks. And so, for example, as Melanie was mentioning earlier, the Hamilton Project put their fiscal stabilizers work out into the world. They sent it to all House and Senate offices. It's not like they only sent it to the Democrats or only sent it to the Republicans, what have you. And so, as you know, as Khadija just mentioned, we put out sound policy ideas, and then whoever may want to take us up on it, like once they do, it's on them, and it's not something that we are advocating for. You know, we could certainly have meetings or what have you with them, but it's not something that we are specifically, you know, pushing in terms of any sort of partisanship endeavor.
So we had a question in the chat about internship opportunities. So we have, and the difference between the ones that occur during the summer and during the semester. So the main difference is that we have more of them in the summer and they are full-time, whereas during the semester we work around your course load, so they would be part-time. And in terms of the qualifications, we're looking, you know, we're not expecting, we know that you don't have your degree yet, you know, you maybe don't have the experience level. We want to, it's more of wanting to give an opportunity for you to learn and develop rather than wanting someone to come in and help us accomplish. I mean, of course, that's what they help with, but we're looking more for intellectual curiosity and, you know, what are you excited about? And, you know, why the internship will serve you more so than why you would serve us in that capacity. So that's the biggest difference, I would say, between the internships and the actual job that we, you know, that is the research assistant job. All right, I think that's about it. Oh wait, I had another question. When we commission another organization to write a paper, do you typically use the same few organizations or does this vary widely based on the topic? Anyone want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take that. So I think for the Hamilton project, we commission individual authors to write papers. Sometimes they may be co-authors. And some of them, you know, are repeat authors, but we do try to bring in new voices. I think it depends on the topic. We want to bring in the best person for a particular topic.
Thank you all for being here today. I hope this was really helpful to you, and best of luck with the rest of your schooling. And I look forward to seeing applications from you all. So thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.